I never meant to pry. It started as a reflex, the kind of thoughtless action you do 1,000 times in marriage. Her laptop sat open on the marble kitchen counter, the silver hinge catching the dim light of the city bleeding through the windows. A document was still glowing on the screen. I reached for it without thinking, planning to close it so the battery wouldn't die. But then my name appeared. Not directly, not written out in bold black ink. Instead, it was disguised in the shape of a character. The foolish spouse. 2 words, capitalized like a title. I would have laughed if it hadn't punched the air from my chest. The cursor blinked at me, like it was waiting for my reaction. At first, I thought it was some sort of draft press release. My wife, Celine, is the kind of CEO who lives off words sharper than any scalpel. Every week she's spitting out keynote speeches, press statements, legal drafts. But this wasn't corporate polish. This was a novel. And it was about us. Her heroine had her features, the commanding voice, the glass-cut jawline, the way she moved through boardrooms as if marble floors bent to her stride. Even the details she added, her signature sapphire pen, the heels that whispered before striking, were Celine to the bone. Which meant the foolish spouse was me. I sank into the barstool, scrolling down line by line. My hand trembled against the trackpad. She hadn't just written a few paragraphs. She'd written chapters. Whole sections tracing our marriage like it was some kind of cheap plotline. The quiet partner who trailed behind, the man whose ambitions shrank while hers ballooned, the one who smiled too easily at dinner parties and mistook politeness for love. I could hear my own voice in those passages, twisted, simplified into a character sketch. And worse, I could hear her voice narrating it, laughing in that cold way she does when she's humoring people beneath her. I didn't breathe until I reached the dialogue. The heroine, her avatar, was speaking to another man. A rival. I didn't recognize his name, Damien, but the description set my blood running cold. He wasn't fictional. He couldn't be. The details were too sharp, his habit of tugging at his cufflinks before making a point, the restless fire in his eyes, the way silence bent toward him as if he demanded it without asking. I'd seen that in real life. At her last gala. At the shareholders' summit. Damien was real. The edges of the words blurred. I shut the laptop halfway, then opened it again, like maybe I'd imagined it. But no, the document sprawled across the screen, an entire romance novel in progress. Except it wasn't fiction at all. It was a prophecy. Every scene I skimmed made bile rise higher in my throat. A dinner conversation where the foolish spouse chattered about books while the heroine pretended to listen. A boardroom scene where Damien sliced through the air with a speech that left everyone clapping while the spouse sat invisible, clinging to relevance. She was writing me out of my own marriage. I pressed my palm against my chest, feeling the pounding thud beneath. Memories slammed into me all at once, late nights when she brushed off my attempts at conversation, mornings when her phone buzzed with messages she'd never explain. The way she said, "we," less and less, as though partnership had become a liability. I'd noticed the distance, but I'd told myself it was the price of her empire. That loving a CEO meant learning to live in her shadow. But now I saw it for what it was. She wasn't just drifting away. She was authoring the story of my irrelevance. My throat ached. I scrolled to the final pages, my fingers icy. That's when I saw the ending. The foolish spouse faded out, not with betrayal, not even with rage. Just silence. Erased, unnamed, a chapter that no longer served the arc. The heroine and Damien stood together instead, victorious, destined. The world bent around them. My eyes locked on the final line, the one she hadn't even bothered to dress up in metaphor. And the final chapter? It ended with me replaced by him. How long had she been writing me out? The question didn't let me sleep. It burrowed in the dark, gnawed at the edges of every memory until nothing I recalled felt clean anymore. When Celine stirred beside me that night, her hand brushing across the sheets like she was reaching for me in her sleep, I froze. I stared at the ceiling until dawn bled through the blinds, wondering if even that gesture was real, or if, in her mind, she'd already drafted the scene where she stopped reaching at all. I replayed the little humiliations I'd brushed aside over the years. At the board dinner last winter, when I leaned in to tell a story about our early days in the apartment with no heat, she cut me off mid-sentence with a smile sharp enough to slice. "No one wants to hear about that, darling. Talk about something impressive." Laughter from the table. My silence afterward. Or the charity gala, where she introduced me not as her husband but as, the one who keeps me grounded. The phrase sounded harmless, but I knew the tone. I was an accessory. A grounding wire, not a partner. Even in private, she'd slip the knife between the ribs and call it love. Once, when I admitted I missed writing, "The pages keep me sane, Celine, I want to try again," she'd looked at me like I was speaking another language. Novels don't pay the mortgage. Be practical. We can't afford indulgences if we're building something real. So I shut the notebook, packed away the pens. I learned how to ghost my own dreams for hers. Now I know the truth. She hadn't just silenced me. She'd recorded me as a cautionary tale, the foolish spouse. The faded background to her heroine's spotlight. I walked through our penthouse that morning in a fog, every corner looking staged. Her trophies gleamed on glass shelves. Her photo spreads from Forbes and Fortune stared back with smiles practiced for cameras, not me. My reflection in those same frames looked foreign. Like I was already a ghost wandering through someone else's story. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to slam the laptop in front of her and say, "Explain this." But Celine was a master of denial. She'd turn the accusation into weakness, tell me I was paranoid, that I was reading too much into words that meant nothing. And I wasn't ready to tip my hand. Not yet. Instead, I returned to the drawer in my office where the old notebooks lived. Dust clung to their covers like they'd been waiting for me. I opened one and found half a page scrawled in ink so messy it barely resembled my handwriting. A man becomes invisible not when no one sees him, but when the person he loves most looks through him like he isn't there. I closed it quickly, heart hammering. That line could have been lifted straight from her manuscript. Had I written my own erasure before she did? Or had she stolen even that from me? The days leading up to the gala were unbearable. Celine rehearsed her speech in the living room, pacing with those sapphire ink note cards, her heels snapping like a metronome. She didn't notice how I flinched at each line, didn't notice how I lingered at the window, staring at the city lights, wondering if I was already a shadow fading from her stage. By the night of the event, my nerves were wire-thin. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and crystal flutes. Men in tuxedos leaned in with too bright smiles, women draped in gowns like armor. Celine moved through it all with surgical precision, the star of her own performance. Cameras followed. Conversations bent toward her orbit. And me? I trailed behind, smiling when required, nodding at strangers who didn't bother to remember my name. The foolish spouse in the flesh. I tried not to think about the manuscript. I tried not to imagine Celine taking mental notes even now, storing details for another chapter where I played the idiot husband who blended into wallpaper. But then I saw him. Across the room, by the marble bar, a man adjusted his cufflinks with a practiced flick of the wrist. His jaw was set in quiet confidence, his eyes burning with restless intent even as he sipped his drink. The crowd seemed to lean toward him without his asking, their attention drawn as if magnetized. My blood froze. It was Damien. Not a character. Not a fiction. The rival she'd written into her pages was standing there, alive, already rehearsing his role in the story where I disappeared. I told myself it was a coincidence. The cut of his suit, the way he toyed with his cufflinks, the fire that flickered in his eyes, maybe Damien was just another powerful man orbiting Celine's empire. Maybe my mind, poisoned by what I'd read, was inventing connections. But then I found myself across the table from him, the three of us locked into the same stage. It was a dinner arranged for investors, one of those evenings where the table was littered with wine glasses, silver cutlery, and 100 hidden knives. Celine had orchestrated it like she always did, seating charts, wine pairings, topics of conversation lined up like dominoes waiting for her to tip. And there he was. Damien. Sitting to her right. I was across, the afterthought spouse with a forced smile. From the moment he opened his mouth, the room bent toward him. He didn't even raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words flowed smooth, threaded with that kind of unshakable certainty only men who'd never been told no could master. The investors leaned in, nodding, laughing too loudly at his humor. Celine glowed in his orbit. Her eyes shone with the same spark I used to think was reserved for me. She matched his cadence, finished his half-sentences, touched his wrist once when laughter spilled across the table. I saw the novel unfolding in real time. The heroine leaned closer, drawn to the fire she could never find in her husband's gentle silence. I'd read that line. I was watching it. My fork lay untouched beside the plate. Every bite of steak turned to ash before I could lift it. They sparred with ideas, mergers, expansion strategies, philanthropic facades. Each word sharpened, tested, polished. I used to admire Celine's mind in these moments, but now I watched like a man dissecting his own obituary. The worst part wasn't their brilliance. It was how invisible I became. When I tried to add something, a simple observation about one of the projects, Celine cut across me without hesitation. Not now, darling. Damien was making a point. Laughter bubbled, smooth, merciless. I lowered my glass and drowned in the red wine. My thoughts spun. Did Damien know? Had Celine shared her manuscript with him? Or was he simply stepping into the role she'd carved out for him, unknowingly playing the character she'd already anointed? I studied him closely, searching for cracks. But all I saw was polish. His tie knotted perfectly, his gestures casual but practiced, his smile magnetic. He was the kind of man Celine would immortalize on paper. And me? I was the foolish spouse. Watching. Enduring. When dessert plates arrived, Celine leaned back in her chair, satisfied with the evening's victories. Damien swirled the last of his wine, eyes flicking toward me for the first time all night. That's when he spoke the line. Word for word. The same sentence I'd read in the draft, delivered with the same easy confidence Celine had written. Some men are meant to watch greatness, not share in it. My blood turned to ice. He couldn't have known. He couldn't have. Unless he'd read the manuscript too. I used to think galas were glamorous. Before Celine, they'd been untouchable fantasies, glittering nights that belonged to other people, people who wore their wealth like armor. Now I know better. They were stages. And Celine was always the star. The ballroom pulsed with champagne laughter and the low hum of strings. Chandeliers cast light like liquid gold across marble floors. Everywhere I looked, cameras blinked red, hungry for the next headline. My reflection in one of the gilded mirrors looked like a stranger, the husband in a tailored suit, face set in a polite mask, there to decorate her success. Not to speak. Not to matter. Celine swept through the crowd with Damien at her side. They weren't touching, not really, but their orbit told a different story. The way her shoulder tilted toward him when she laughed, the subtle lean of his body in her direction, the eye contact that lingered 1 second too long. I'd read it all before. On her laptop. Word for word. The heroine sparkled brightest beside him, her laughter freer than it had ever been with the foolish spouse. It wasn't just a novel anymore. It was choreography. Every movement rehearsed in ink before being staged here, in front of me, with 1,000 witnesses clapping at their chemistry. I stood near the bar, fingers tightening around my glass until my knuckles ached. My throat burned with words I couldn't say, not without detonating everything. But maybe it was time to detonate. When the music softened and Celine was ushered to the podium, the room hushed with reverence. She thrived on this. The spotlight. The authority. Her sapphire pen flicked across her notes once before she began, her voice velvet and steel all at once. Tonight, she said, we celebrate not only generosity but vision. The vision to see beyond ourselves, to build something lasting, something extraordinary. The crowd leaned in, hanging on her every word. Damien stood just off stage, framed by light, smiling like the co-author of her triumph. And me? I stood invisible. The foolish spouse in flesh and blood. Until she raised her glass. To the future, Celine declared. To those who stand with us, and to those. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was the manuscript echoing in my head, maybe the memory of Damien's smirk as he recited her words at dinner, maybe the suffocating weight of knowing my own life had been reduced to a subplot. But I cut her off. I didn't raise my glass. I didn't smile. I let my voice carry just enough to slice through the hush. No. The word dropped like a blade. Heads turned. A ripple of confusion spread through the room. Celine froze, her glass suspended midair, her perfect smile stiffening into something sharp. No, she repeated, her tone laced with disbelief, almost playful for the cameras. I won't toast to a future I've already read, I said. The silence that followed was heavier than applause. It was suffocating, electric. Cameras clicked, whispers hissed. Celine's eyes found mine, diamond-hard, unreadable to anyone else, but I knew that look. It was the look she gave just before striking. She recovered quickly, laughter spilling from her lips like champagne overflow. Forgive him, she said to the room, her hand fluttering with feigned amusement. A writer's imagination. He's prone to dramatics. The crowd chuckled, eager to follow her lead, to pretend nothing had cracked. The orchestra struck up a gentle string refrain, cushioning the moment, sweeping the tension away. But I felt it. The fracture. The eyes that lingered on me longer than before. The questions blooming behind their polite smiles. When the toast ended and applause rose like a tide, Celine descended from the podium. She didn't break stride as she passed me, her lips curved in that practiced, perfect smile for the cameras. She leaned close, her perfume curling like smoke around me, her voice a blade disguised as silk. You were never supposed to see that. The boardroom smelled of power, polished wood, sharp cologne, coffee brewed too strong. It was the kind of place where futures were inked and erased with a signature. Celine thrived here. I had always been the quiet companion on the sidelines, content to watch her reign. But after the gala, nothing felt the same. The whispers followed me as I entered, even if no one spoke them aloud. The investors' eyes skimmed over me with polite dismissal, the same way they might glance at an unscheduled guest. Somewhere between the champagne and the chandelier, I had slipped from husband to problem. Celine sat at the head of the table, flawless as always. Damien occupied the seat just left of her, close enough that the symmetry looked intentional. His suit was a shade darker than hers, a shadow cast at her right hand. The meeting began, and Damien spoke first. Optics are delicate, he said, his voice steady, warm, commanding. One wrong impression can set back months of progress. Fortunately, we know how to correct narratives before they spiral. Narratives. The word slashed at me. The investors nodded, eating from his palm. He was charming without trying, his smile disarming, his cadence practiced but not stiff. He painted pictures with words the way Celine once told me I should if I ever wanted to be a real writer. And then, carefully, he pivoted. Of course, distractions exist. Personal matters sometimes cloud judgment, but what sets true leaders apart is their ability to rise above noise. The room hummed with subtle agreement. I felt their eyes flick toward me and away again, like I was the noise in question. I clenched my fists beneath the table. Are you implying? Not at all, Damien interrupted smoothly, palms lifted in mock humility. I was merely pointing out what we all know, this company, this vision, deserves clarity, focus, strength. He looked at Celine. Not at me. Celine smiled, lips curved like a blade hidden in velvet. Exactly. Which is why I appreciate Damien's presence here. His insight has been invaluable. The words landed heavier than any slap. I opened my mouth, desperate to drag her truth into the light, to shout that he was more than invaluable to her. That she was writing him into her story while erasing me. But how could I? What proof did I have? A half-finished manuscript she would dismiss as fiction. I'd look unhinged. Just as Damien wanted. He leaned back in his chair, confidence radiating from every line of his body. He didn't need to win the argument. He only needed to frame me as someone not worth listening to. And Celine, my wife, helped him. Shielded him. The meeting went on, my presence shrinking further with each passing minute. I watched the script tighten around me, the foolish spouse, written into silence, into irrelevance. By the end, no one even asked for my opinion. They moved around me, as though I were furniture. I walked out with fire in my chest, but the weight of defeat pressing down on me. Maybe Celine was right. Maybe novels didn't lie. Maybe I was destined to be erased. My phone buzzed. A new message lit the screen from an unknown number. Just one sentence. That draft isn't finished. Want the real ending? The message haunted me long after the boardroom emptied. That draft isn't finished. Want the real ending? It was past midnight, the city outside my window buzzing faintly with sirens and late-night taxis. I sat in the dark with the glow of my phone in my hand, thumb hovering over the message. I wanted to respond. To demand answers. To scream. But I didn't. The phone rang before I could decide. Her name lit up the screen. Celine. For a second, my chest clenched the way it always did, the reflex of years, the muscle memory of love, or habit, or both. I answered. Her voice poured through the speaker, hushed and silken, as if she'd been waiting for me to pick up. You're awake, she said. Not a question. She always knew. I couldn't sleep, I admitted, my voice rough. Silence stretched between us, thick and loaded. Then she sighed, soft enough to almost sound like regret. I heard about how you stormed out of the meeting, she murmured. They said you looked lost. Lost. The word stung more than any insult. You made me look lost, I said. You made me invisible in front of everyone. Another sigh, this one sharper, threaded with annoyance. You're overthinking it again. You always do this. You take things personally that aren't personal. Not personal. My laugh cracked. You wrote me a manuscript as the foolish spouse. You wrote Damien as. It was just a draft, she cut in quickly, her tone suddenly fragile, trembling. Do you really think I meant it like that? You of all people should understand. Stories need conflict. They need tension, villains, and failures. You can't build something great without friction. My stomach twisted. So I'm just friction to you. I didn't say that. Her voice softened again, almost tender. I was writing, experimenting. You always said you loved my ambition. Don't tell me now you hate the way it spills over. She dangled the hook so easily. Her tone shifted like smoke, slipping between apology and accusation. It made me dizzy. Part of me wanted to believe her, to take the bait, to think that I'd misread everything. Maybe she was still mine. But then she twisted the knife. You know I still need you, she whispered. I need the stability, the history we've built. No one else understands me like you do. Damien, he's fire, yes, but fire burns out. You're the steady one. The anchor. The anchor. The grounding wire. The foolish spouse. It wasn't love she was offering. It was useful. Do you even hear yourself? I asked, my voice breaking against the edges of my anger. You want me for your image. For the story you can tell the world. You don't want me, you want a character you can control. She didn't answer at first. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, she said, maybe you're right. But isn't that what marriage is? Roles we agree to play. I gripped the phone tighter, every muscle in my body tense. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to scream. But some treacherous part of me still clung to her words, to the echo of what she used to mean. Celine, I said, my voice low. If you want me, then tell me the truth. Tell me Damien is nothing. There was a pause. Then, faintly, not from her lips but from somewhere behind her, I heard a man's voice. Confidence. Smooth. Unmistakable. Damien. And then the line went quiet. The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes wasn't the ceiling. It was my phone screen lighting up with a cascade of notifications. Buzz. 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 Dozens of tags. Mentions. Shares. My chest tightened before I even touched it. Some part of me already knew. I opened the first message. And there it was. A photo of Celine and Damien, smiling too close, too polished, like a pair of characters posed by fate itself. She wore her signature ivory blazer. He matched her with a black tailored suit. Their hands didn't touch, not quite, but the space between them pulsed with implication. The caption gutted me. Visionaries. A partnership written in the stars. Written. The word wasn't an accident. Scrolling down felt like peeling skin from bone. Comment after comment. Praise for them. Admiration. Predictions that they'd change the industry. And somewhere beneath that, the quiet mockery of me. Wasn't she married? Her husband's invisible anyway. Dead weight, holding her back. I dropped the phone on the nightstand, bile rising in my throat. It was one thing to suffer in silence, in private. It was another to have the world confirm it, screenshot it, retweet it into eternity. And still, through the humiliation, I saw it for what it was, another chapter lifted straight from her manuscript. She wasn't hiding it anymore. She was publishing the story of us, with me as the expendable subplot. But if she wanted me to be the foolish spouse, I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. I got out of bed, walked to the drawer I hadn't opened in years. Inside were notebooks, journals, pages stained with ink that once mattered to me. My words. My characters. My dream. I had abandoned them for Celine, for her empire, for her spotlight. I flipped one open. My handwriting stared back at me, shaky but alive. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt awake. I whispered it to myself like a vow, I won't be her pawn. I'll rewrite my story. I didn't know if I had the stamina, the talent, or the time. But I knew this, I couldn't keep playing the role she'd assigned me. If she was going to script my erasure, I'd write a counterstory. The phone buzzed again. A new message. From David. You need to see this. Attached was a screenshot. Damien's name, clear as day. A publishing proposal. The subject line read, New Work in Progress, by Celine and Damien. A modern romance of power, betrayal, and rebirth. And beneath it, the pitch was hers. Her draft. My erasure. My pulse pounded in my ears as I read David's note. He's shopping for her manuscript. Not just her words. Their story. Our story. Do you still want the real ending? The glow of the laptop screen painted the room in cold light. Celine's manuscript sat open, the cursor blinking like it was taunting me. Chapter 12, The Foolish Spouse Crumbles. I slammed the lid shut. Beside it, scattered across my desk, were my own notebooks, dusty, neglected, their pages smudged with half-finished stories. My voice is buried under years of compromise. If she could write me into nothing, I could write myself back into existence. I pulled the closest notebook toward me, flipping through lines I barely remembered writing. Characters that never had an ending. Dreams that never saw light. My chest burned, but it wasn't grief this time. It was something sharper. Resolve. I tore out the last unfinished page, crumpled it, and tossed it aside. Then I opened a blank document. Fingers trembling, I typed 3 words. This is mine. Not hers. Not Damien's. Not anyone's. Mine. The hours blurred. The sound of keys filled the silence like a heartbeat. I wasn't sure what I was writing, memoir, fiction, something in between, but the words came, jagged and raw. They tasted like freedom. By morning, I wasn't just angry. I was alive. Celine noticed the shift the moment I walked into her office that afternoon. She was reviewing a contract, glasses perched low, but her gaze flicked up and sharpened. You look different, she said flatly. I am, I answered. She set the pen down. Is this about the posts? About Damien? It's about me. I leaned forward. I know what you're doing, Celine. Writing me into a caricature. Selling our life like a plot you can cash out. But I won't play it anymore. Her jaw tightened. Don't be dramatic. You're embarrassing yourself. Maybe, I said. But at least I'm not living someone else's script. Her lips parted, shock flickering before the mask slid back into place. She laughed once, cold. Do you think anyone cares about your version? You've always needed me to give you relevance. I met her gaze without flinching. Not anymore. The silence cracked like glass between us. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, but it was gone in an instant. She picked up her pen and dismissed me with a wave. I walked out lighter. That night, I deleted our shared folders, the years of joint projects she'd claimed as her empire. I unfollowed her accounts, silenced her name, cut every digital thread that bound me to her performance. It was brutal. It was cleansing. By the time I reached the parking garage, exhaustion weighed on me, but so did something else, relief. The concrete echoed under my footsteps. The air smelled of oil and damp stone. I pressed the fob, my car beeped, headlights flashing weakly against the shadows. That's when I heard it. A voice behind me. Smooth, low, familiar. You've been busy, Damien said. I turned. He was leaning against a pillar, hands in his pockets, posture casual but eyes sharp. The overhead light cast his shadow long and thin across the floor. My pulse spiked. What do you want? He stepped closer, slow, deliberate. To remind you that no one escapes the story. Not you. Not her. Not me. I swallowed hard. I'm not your character. He leaned in until his breath brushed my ear. You'll play your role whether you want to or not. And then he smiled. The plane touched down at dawn, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The city was nothing like home. Its skyline wasn't sharp glass and steel but worn brick, domes, and rooftops that glowed golden in the early light. Streets curved instead of cutting straight. Strangers spoke with accents that softened every word. It felt like stepping onto a blank page. I had rented a small apartment above a cafe. The walls were pale, the furniture minimal, but there was a desk pressed against a wide window that looked out over a bustling square. The kind of desk I used to imagine having back when I thought writing was still possible. This time, it was. I set down my laptop, opened it, and instead of Celine's draft staring back at me, it was mine. A single document titled, Unwritten. For days, I let myself fall into the rhythm of words. Morning coffee, afternoon walks, nights filled with the click of keys. My story wasn't polished, but it was mine, messy, bruised, alive. I no longer wrote in the shadows. I wasn't her character anymore. There were others too, writers, artists, drifters who gathered in the cafe below to argue about ideas that had nothing to do with market strategies or quarterly optics. They listened when I spoke, and no one called me foolish. I wasn't invisible. I was becoming something again. And meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Celine's empire began to bend. I didn't look for it, but the internet made sure I couldn't miss it. Screenshots of delayed projects. Investors whispering doubts. Threads dragging her latest speech for sounding rehearsed. And the pictures, oh, the pictures. The same ones that once showed Celine and Damien gleaming now revealed cracks, her hand frozen mid-gesture while he looked bored, their smiles not quite aligned, captions filled with sarcasm instead of praise. The tide was turning, and for once, I wasn't drowning in it. I was standing on shore, watching her perfect kingdom erode. I wrote faster. Stronger. Not out of revenge, but out of relief. I wasn't writing against her anymore. I was writing myself into being. One night, I stared at my hands, fingers stained faintly with ink from the pen I'd used to sketch out an outline. Ink stains used to mean failure, mess, abandoned drafts. Now they meant progress. Proof that I was choosing my own marks. I was free. Until my phone buzzed. A new notification. A direct message. The name made my stomach twist. Celine. No words in the preview. Just her initials. For a moment, I just stared. My pulse quickened, my chest tight. She had found me. The cafe smelled of fresh bread and burnt espresso. My mornings here had become a ritual: order a cappuccino, sit by the window, write until the square outside blurred into background noise. But that morning, the ritual broke. Because she was there. Celine. Sitting at the corner table in a crisp navy dress, posture perfect, eyes locked on me the second I stepped through the door. She looked like she had been waiting. My pulse skipped, but I didn't stumble. Not this time. I walked past the barista's knowing smile, ordered my coffee, and only then approached her table. Surprised, she asked, voice as smooth as glass. No, I said, sliding into the chair opposite her. You always follow the story when it escapes you. Her lips curved faintly, but her eyes sharpened. You've changed. I've started writing again, I said simply. That caught her off guard. A flicker of something crossed her face, disbelief, irritation, maybe even fear. She leaned in, lowering her voice. You don't understand what you're doing. You think independence will save you, but the world doesn't read stories without conflict, without heartbreak. That's what I give you. I sipped my coffee, meeting her gaze evenly. No. That's what you take from me. What I'm writing now isn't about you. Or Damien. It's about me. For once, she didn't have a quick retort. Her hand tightened on the table's edge, knuckles white. She had built a kingdom out of narrative control, and here I was, refusing to be cast. It won't matter, she whispered finally. Without me, no one will care. Maybe, I said. But I'd rather be unread than rewritten. The words landed like a blow. She blinked, and for the first time in years, I saw her falter. This was my blank page, not hers. I was writing this moment as it unfolded, and she couldn't edit a single line. Then the door opened. The air shifted. Damien. He walked in with the confidence of a man who owned every eye in the room. Heads turned. Conversations hushed. He spotted us immediately and smiled like the ending was already his. Perfect, he said, striding over, voice carrying for everyone nearby to hear. All three of us together. Just like the draft. My stomach tightened. He stopped beside Celine, hand brushing the back of her chair as he looked down at me. You think you can escape the story, he said, loud enough for the cafe to notice. But you don't get to walk out halfway. You still belong in her story. The words weren't for me. They were for the room. For the audience. And suddenly, we weren't three people in a cafe anymore. We were characters on a stage. She asked to meet at the rooftop garden of a hotel overlooking the city. Night had fallen, but the skyline glowed with neon and glass, flickering like a set made for someone else's performance. When I found her, she wasn't pristine. Her hair was pulled too tight, mascara smudged faintly at the edges. The navy dress she wore had wrinkles in the sleeves. Celine never allowed wrinkles. Thank you for coming, she said softly, as though gratitude could erase months of betrayal. I didn't answer right away. I simply leaned against the railing, the cool metal steady beneath my hands. She inhaled sharply, then spoke. I need to explain the manuscript. My jaw tightened, but I nodded once. Her eyes glistened in the city light. It wasn't meant to hurt you. It wasn't even meant to replace you. It was a test. A way to trap what I couldn't say out loud. Every marriage has fractures, but if you write them down, if you ink them into existence, they become controlled. Contained. That's all I wanted. My stomach twisted. You wanted to contain me? No, she said quickly. Then slower, faltering, yes. Maybe. I didn't know how else to test it. To test you. To see if you'd stay, even when the story turned against you. I stared at her, the words burning. So I was an experiment. It was art, she insisted. Art needs conflict. Art needs risk. I wasn't betraying you, I was, writing to us. Writing the sharp edges so you'd fight for me. I let the silence stretch. Let her words echo back at her. Once, those words would have undone me. I would have chased their meaning, twisted them into hope. But not now. You wanted me to prove myself, I said evenly. But all you proved was that I was a character to you. That my pain was material. That you'll always choose the story over the person. Her lip trembled. You don't mean that. I do. For the first time, her composure cracked. Tears welled, not staged for optics but raw. She stepped closer, hands trembling at her sides. You don't understand, she whispered. The novel isn't finished. It never was. Every chapter was just a draft. But what if, she drew in a shaky breath. Her eyes locked on mine, burning. What if I change the ending? Back in my apartment, the rooftop words still rang in my head. What if I change the ending? Once, that question would have undone me. It would have left me searching for the possibility of redemption, the scraps of a love I still believed in. But not now. The truth was simple, brutal, final. I didn't want her ending. I didn't want her script. I didn't want her pages written in blood. I'd bled for her career. I wanted mine. On the desk, Celine's draft still lingered in digital form, the same document that had gutted me the night I opened it. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, trembling, but then I forced myself to act. Delete. Every copy. Every backup. Every trace of her narrative in my orbit. Still, it wasn't enough. My chest burned, restless, until I did what I hadn't allowed myself to before. I printed the last physical copy of the draft I'd saved in anger. I fed the pages, one by one, into the small metal bin on my balcony and struck a match. The fire caught quick, curling the words into blackened edges, smoke lifting into the night air. The foolish spouse. The partnership of stars. The final chapter. All of it turned to ash. I didn't look away. I wasn't her character anymore. For the first time, I sat down at my desk and opened my own document without hesitation. Not a rebuttal. Not revenge. Just my story. Each word pressed into the screen felt like a declaration. Each line of dialogue, each turn of description belonged to me. While I wrote, the world moved on without me, and yet, not without cracks. My phone lit up with alerts I hadn't asked for, a botched product launch from Celine's company. Investors pulling out. Hashtags questioning her leadership. And then photos, Celine at a gala, her smile tight, Damien at her side whispering in her ear while the captions speculated about fractures between them. Her empire wasn't untouchable anymore. The flawless image was breaking. I should have felt triumphant. I didn't. I just felt free. I typed until dawn. The sun was rising when my phone buzzed with a call from David. Tell me you're sitting down, he said, voice tight. I'm fine, I said, glancing at my growing document. Better than fine. Not for long, he muttered. Then the sound of keys clacking. He was sending something. My screen lit with a forwarded email, bold subject line glaring back at me. Submission, The Romance of Power. By Celine. No co-author. No rival's name. Just hers. And below, the note she'd attached. This is my final work. The ending will silence every question. David's voice came back, grim. She's publishing it. With or without you. The ashes on my balcony hadn't killed the draft after all. She'd kept her copy. And she was about to immortalize it. Anna's office smelled of ink and coffee, a place where words weren't cages but wings. Manuscripts lined the shelves in mismatched spines, some raw drafts, others polished jewels. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't drowning. I was building. Anna leaned against the edge of my desk, tapping a pen against her palm. This draft, she said, smiling faintly, it doesn't read like someone trying to prove a point. It reads like someone is finally telling the truth. I exhaled slowly, letting the words wash over me. Her presence was grounding, no games, no veiled tests, no manipulation. Just clarity. I didn't think I had the truth left, I admitted. You do, she said simply. And you're not writing alone anymore. The warmth between us lingered unspoken, but steady. I wasn't just her project, her discovery. I was, me. The illusion of peace shattered with a notification ping. David's text. Turn on the live stream. Now. Anna reached for her tablet, pulled up the feed. Celine's face filled the screen, flawless once again, every strand of hair lacquered into place. Behind her, the company's logo gleamed like a crown. Tonight, she was saying to a sea of microphones, I share not just a book, but a truth. A story written from the heart. A story of betrayal, ambition, and redemption. She held up a thick-bound manuscript, her smile cutting. The romance of power. Applause roared. Flashes snapped. Anna glanced at me, concerned about etching her brow. You don't have to. I do, I said, already standing. When I arrived at the venue, the press swarm was still circling her like moths to her fire. She basked in it, radiant, but when her eyes caught mine, the mask faltered for just a second. Ah, she said into the microphone, her voice echoing. The inspiration himself arrives. Perhaps you'd like to say something, darling. The crowd turned. Cameras swung toward me, lenses like gun barrels aimed at my chest. I stepped forward. My pulse thundered, but not with fear. With clarity. I looked at her, the woman who had scripted me, tested me, nearly broken me, and then I looked past her, into the endless lenses, the audience beyond. My voice was steady. I don't live in your book anymore. Gasps rippled. Celine's smile froze, a crack splitting across porcelain. The morning after the press conference, the city felt strangely quiet. Not silent, no, the traffic still hummed, the screen still glared with headlines, but for me, it was the first time in years that quiet had lived inside my chest. I had spoken the words out loud, in front of cameras and strangers and her, I don't live in your book anymore. And with them, something unspooled. She tried, of course. There were emails, clipped, polished, a mirror of the woman who used to dictate entire rooms with a single glance. There was a voicemail, half plea, half threat. There were press statements framing me as bitter, ungrateful, delusional. All the old tricks. But they didn't cut anymore. They didn't even graze. Celine's voice had become static. I didn't need to respond. I didn't need to fight. Her stage was hers to burn down. I had my own. Anna found me at the little corner cafe where I'd started drafting again. She slid a coffee across the table, her smile warm, easy. You look lighter, she said. I feel lighter, I admitted. You know, she added, tapping the laptop in front of me, most writers are terrified of the blank page. I looked at the screen, empty, white, endless. Once, it terrified me too. It had felt like proof of failure, of stories that would never live. Now it was a possibility. It doesn't scare me anymore, I said quietly. It's mine. The afternoon sun shifted through the window, spilling light across the keyboard, across my hands. I let myself breathe it in, steady and full, before placing my fingers on the keys. Not to react, not to defend, not to prove her wrong, to write. Because my life wasn't a role, or a draft, or a subplot in someone else's epic. It was a page waiting for my words. And this time, I wasn't giving it away. The cursor blinked, patient. The future was unwritten, and the pen was mine.